Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means it's time for the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale are found at hugh4hillsdale.com or easily at hillsdale.edu, including the ability to sign up for Imprimis, including the ability to watch their video courses, and including Dr. Arnn's podcast, because he's now competing with our podcast with Dr. Arnn's podcast. What is that podcast about, Dr. Arnn? What do you talk about on that you don't talk about with me?
Well, it's the same thing except without you.
So it's better. I get it. I want the...
Yeah, I don't know what it's about. I know that I've done it with Ron DeSantis and Jordan Peterson and Heather McDonald and Chigozie Obiama and somebody else.
I don't know who that third person is.
Oh, he's important. He's a novelist, and he's from Nigeria, and he's a fellow of Hillsdale College. He comes and teaches, and he's written 2 novels, and the third one's coming out in the spring. And they're important. They've been finalists for the Booker Prize, of which he's also a judge. And he's a big deal. And he's a great man. He's a delightful man. He lives in Nebraska, teaches at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and then comes to us every year. Some of my professors fell in love with him, and then I fell in love with him.
You know, I don't read much fiction. And when I do, it's usually escapist thrillers about Gabriel Allon by Daniel Silva or C.J. Box about Joe Pickett. What does he write about?
Well, the first novel is called The Fisherman, and it's both of the 2 novels he's written, and the third one, I'm told, coming out in the spring, are in Nigeria. And they're about life in that place. So The Fisherman is about 3 young men who sneak down to the river, cutting school to fish, and they're not supposed to. They get caught. But then their lives turn into tragedy. The books are very arresting and powerful, and I've encouraged him to write happier ending this time, and he has equivocated about that. The second one is the one I know the best. It's called An Orchestra of Minorities. And it's about a young man who had some experience such as Chigozie had. He meets a girl. It's a simply lovely love story. The boy is poor. He raises poultry. He's got a chicken coop, and that's how he lives. And he meets this girl, and this girl is very beautiful, and he is a beautiful young man. And they fall in love, and the girl turns out to be rich. And so he feels like he will be better accepted by his wife-to-be's family if he gets a college degree. And he sells his chicken farm, and he gives all the money to go to Crete? Yeah, Cyprus, to get a college degree. And the money gets stolen.
Oh.
And the action follows from that. And it's Chigozie is very talented, and he makes you ache for these 2 young people. And there's
that's what novels are supposed to do. You know, I'm suspicious of novels generally, unless you and I have talked about them. For example, the novels in your class on totalitarianism. One of my favorite books being That Hideous Strength. But I need it recommended to me by someone. If it's not a time filler, if it's not a thriller. I have my thrillers. I read C.J. Box. I read Daniel Silva. You got to have C.J. Box, put on his snowshoes and come over from wherever he lives in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, and teach at Hillsdale. He'll be right at home in the winter. But I generally don't trust people's recommendations on novels, except yours, because generally speaking, they depend upon the reader too much as opposed to the objective value of the book.
Well, the great ones, no. So I know about Chigozie Obioma because Dutton Carney, who teaches literature here at Hillsdale College. We have a hot, big English department, very popular, very hard graders. And kids just fall in love with them. Well, those professors are always telling me things to read. The reason I have watched the TV series Breaking Bad is because my kids were trying to get Penny and me to watch it, and it didn't sound like my kind of thing. But then Dutton Carney comes in my office and says, "You got to watch this." And I did, and I saw that he was right. Well, he's the one who brought up Obioma, and he says, "I think we ought to get him here." And so I helped him do that, and then everybody here has fallen in love with him. And he teaches a course, how to write a novel. And I've seen the syllabus for the course. I haven't been to the classes, but you can really find out how to do it. And he's, there's this Nigerian movement. Nigeria is, huge, right? It's a story like India, which is now the most populous nation in the world. What Nigeria has, I don't know the population of Nigeria, but there's speculation that it's going to be more populous than the United States in the intermediate future. And Indonesia is like that too.
We have never heard of Dutton before on this course. And on all the years we've been doing this, you've never mentioned Dutton, and he's not been our guest. How old is Dutton? Is he as old as I am?
No, only I am as old as you are. Dutton is, I don't know how old Dutton is. He's probably in his 40s. He's a young man. He's a tremendous college professor because he's recommended these two things to me. Anytime I talk about them, and I alas talk way too much in public, I always mention him, and he doesn't like it. He prefers anonymity. And but we should get him on the show. He'd be really good. And,
we didn't mention him. For the benefit of the Dutton, we're not talking about you, Dutton. It's a different Dutton. It's the Duttons of Yellowstone, which is another series I would never have imagined you to watch. I cannot even believe he got you to watch Breaking Bad. So he is a 5-star professor in my book if he got Larry Arnn to watch Breaking Bad.
And we've watched it all. And we're not talking, by the way, about the Dutton Carney, whose surname is spelled Kearney, who teaches at Hillsdale College. It must be another guy.
I didn't even know you had an English department. I thought they were closing all over the country. I really have read that their English departments are closing all over the country.
We just, first of all, it's English majors. Hillsdale College is really strange and, great, I submit. And history and English are big deals, but physics, classics. We had the great Joshua Katz on campus yesterday, and he's a Princeton professor. He was the most awarded popular Princeton professor for 20 years. And he reads Greek and Hebrew and Latin and Sanskrit. And because I've become interested in India, and he's a delightful man. He's probably leaving today. He's coming back to teach again soon. But our classics department, I think last year it was, it's not the first time, we won first, second, and third in the National Greek and Latin Translation Contest. And
wow,
we're always in the top 10. And, everybody's there who teaches Greek and Latin. I think Trip Young, the chairman of the department, Duke PhD, military veteran, interesting guy, good guy. He told me last night, because we were having reception with Joshua Katz, he told me last night that 20% of our freshmen come in with some Latin competence. And that there's an exam you take. And that means that the numbers who read Latin have got to be north of that somewhere. And, that's a big deal. We like that.
I have to tell a quick story, and it has to be very quick because we've blown up the outline and we're going to go to break. But I arrived at Harvard in 1974, and they had a language requirement. And I'd taken 4 years of Latin and 1 of ancient Greek, and I was going to mail it in. So I took Intro to Latin, and I used the same Wheelock book that I'd been using since I was in 9th grade. And sure enough, I got an A, and I sat in the back row and never did anything. I'm one of those people who are not Latin competent, but nevertheless knew enough about Latin to sit in the back row and get out of my language requirement. I hate language requirements. After the break, I'm going to find out if Hillsdale has one, and then we're going to get back on our outline because we're way the heck blown up that. But I am also going to go listen to Dr. Arnn's podcast with the novelists and with Jordan Peterson and with Heather McDonald because those must be pretty interesting conversations. They're all at hillsdale.edu. All the Hillsdale Dialogues are collected at hughforhillsdale.com. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back with Dr. Larry Arnn of Hillsdale College. Stay tuned.
Hey, it's Scott Bertram, and I've got a challenge for you today. Become a better educated American citizen. And to help you do just that, we at Hillsdale College have our free online courses available for all who wish to learn. Our challenge? Take just one of our courses. There are so many to choose from. You can discover the beauty of the Bible in the Genesis story, study the writings of C.S. Lewis, or explore the true meaning of America in Constitution 101. We have dozens more to choose from, and all these self-paced free courses feature Hillsdale faculty and scholars, many you've heard on this podcast. So visit hillsdale.edu/course, COURSE, and pick one of the more than 30 free Hillsdale courses. I hope you'll accept my challenge. Pick whichever course you like and become a more educated citizen today. Go to hillsdale.edu/course, COURSE. That's hillsdale.edu/course.
Welcome back, America. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Dr. Arnn and I are talking the Friday after Thanksgiving, but we recorded this before Thanksgiving, and I don't want to try and trick anyone into that. So there have been events in Israel that we will not be on top of. But I want to come back, Dr. Arnn, to a moment to language requirements. To be the youngest in the family is to have an advantage of watching your siblings perhaps go through college, and perhaps both of your siblings failed German, so you arrive on campus aware that don't take German, it's not for beginners. And so if it's a language requirement, just get out of it. What does Hillsdale require when it comes to languages?
Well, there are two tracks, Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science. A Bachelor of Arts, which most people take, have a language requirement. Bachelor of Science has draconian math requirements.
That's a Hobbesian choice for me.
Yeah. Well, but that means that, by the way, lots of people who get Bachelor of Science also get a language because it's most everybody does here. I can tell you that I found out from our math department. We have a really great math department, and the only faculty member I've ever asked if I could kiss him is Tom Trelaw, the chairman of math, and he refused. And the reason I did was that they came and asked me for a core course. And, the politics of a college, ours are very strange and very different from anybody else's. And most places you can't do core curricula because the majors are jealous and they want to grab a few and turn them into their acolytes. And there's some of that here. But and it's also impractical to do a core because every time you make a core course, then that department has to be big enough to teach the whole student body, whether anybody wants to take it or not. And that means that at Hillsdale, we don't do surveys asking 17-year-olds what they want to study so they can come to college. We tell them, here it is, go somewhere else, we dare you. And so we have a big core. Well, the math core expanded because the department came and said, look, we're exempting people from math who have a certain ACT score or SAT score or above, and nobody gets into the college who doesn't have that.
Right.
We're exempting everybody if they want to be exempt. And I said, gosh, you guys are asking me for a core course? And they said, yeah. And I said, good, let's do that. So, it's complicated. You got to go, there's the Education Policy Committee and the vote of the faculty. And every time I've asked the faculty for a vote for expansion of the core, they voted overwhelmingly in favor. Anyway, then I found out later that in their intro to math, they're teaching Euclid. And everybody's got to take Euclid here now. And I happen to love that because there's this beautiful thing that Lincoln wrote, or that an interview with Lincoln. After Lincoln gave a speech in Hartford, Connecticut at the time of the Cooper Union address. That speech in Hartford is not as well known as many, but it's, like most of them, beautiful. And if you know, it's after the Lincoln-Douglas debates and it's before the run for president. And Lincoln goes back east and gives some speeches, and it's the second thing that made him a national figure. The first was the reporting of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And the Cooper Union address is the most famous of them, the famous place in New York. But he gave this in Hartford, Connecticut, and here's what he said. That's really wonderful. The Republican platform in 1856 and 1860 says that they won't interfere with slavery in the states where it exists, there being no constitutional power, but we will forbid it entirely from the territories. And there's good evidence that that argument was first conceived in a building that stands at Hillsdale College right now by Austin Blair and Edmund Fairfield, soon the Civil War governor and lieutenant governor of Michigan. And that's one of the greatest acts of a political party in history, in my opinion, because they found a way to deal with the problem while respecting the Constitution. And so that leads, of course, to all kinds of controversy. Everything does. So the Republicans and Lincoln encountered the argument, if it's bad, why don't you get rid of it everywhere? And if it's okay anywhere, why is it not okay everywhere? And Lincoln answers that the best in this Hartford, Connecticut speech. He says, if I see a rattlesnake around my house, what I do depends on where it is. If it's in the garden, I get a stick and kill it for fear that it will bite my children. But what if it's in bed with my children? Might I not fail to stir it up for fear it will bite the children in the hope that it will just crawl away? So you see, the Constitution is the children. And Abraham Lincoln was a very capable man. And so the next morning he gets on a train. There's a wonderful book published in 1974.
Don't finish the anecdote. I want to hear the anecdote in full, and we got to go to a break. We're going to find out what he said on the train about the rattlesnake and how that connects to Euclid and the math department. That's an elaborate construct, but we will hold it through the break and be right back on the Hillsdale Dialogue. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. If you're just tuning in, I want you to know two things. One, I worked all weekend on an elaborate outline for today's show, and we have not yet touched it. And number two, if you just joined in, Dr. Arnn was explaining why Euclid is in the core course of math at Hillsdale and how that involved Abraham Lincoln's speech at Hartford, which involved an analogy about rattlesnakes and slavery. And then we're going to land that point, Dr. Arnn. What did he say to the person who questioned him about the Hartford speech and the rattlesnakes?
Next morning, he gets on a train, and of course he's very recognizable. And a preacher, who is also a journalist, says, "May I sit with you? Saw your speech." And Lincoln says, "Sure." So the train starts, and the guy says, "The big question, how did you write that speech?" Because, it was galvanizing. And it was really just like that. How did you write that speech? And Lincoln replies this way. I can quote it, almost paraphrase it, but it's close. Oh, I got to tell you about the book. There's a book published by a man named Richard Mellon. I think you can still find it around. And it's a big coffee table book, and it's pictures of Lincoln, beautifully restored, full big things. And then on the opposite page, something Lincoln did. And I know this story from that book. And I still have that book open on my desk, and I read it to young people often. But you'll see why when I tell you what the story says. Lincoln says, well, I was reading law. How'd you write that speech? Well, I was reading law, he says. And I kept running across the word demonstrate. It's italicized in this article by this preacher every time it occurs. And he says, I began to think that that was some extraordinary kind of proof. And I thought to myself, Lincoln, you will never make a lawyer if you don't learn to demonstrate. So I read Blackstone and I read law cases. And then I went home to my father's house, and I did not return until I could recite all of the propositions in the 6 books of Euclid from memory. Now,
wow.
The point of that story is that's ambition. See, just Monday of this week, I ate in the dining hall, and a bunch of silly boys from Simpson dorm sit down with me, and I've been talking to India. And everybody in the college is wanting to strike out for India. Gotta go. Oh wow, that's good. We gotta go to India. It's just I just love that, right? I am just like them. I like going to India too. So they have a business plan they announced to me, and there are 50 boys, and they want to go to India for a semester, and they want 20 hours of credit. And I replied, no, you may not.
Did they come en masse to you and sit down and present this in the dining hall? Did they ambush you?
Yeah, of course. And, it's like being savaged by a dead sheep, as they say.
Yeah, let them have their course, Doctor. Free the Hillsdale 20. That's what I'm starting now.
But I told them about this. I said, it's a question of how ambitious are you? Because if what you want to do is just get ahead and go see something strange, there's a lot of people who have that. What if you want to be good at it? What if you want to really be a force for good? What if you want to know before you do? And see, that's what that Lincoln story is about. Well, I love that story, and I've told it many times. And that book, if you come to my office, I will show you the passage in the book. And I have a big stand-up.
It reminds me, Dr. Arnn, the first time I sat down with Richard Nixon in San Clemente in 1978. I wasn't working for him. It was just an interview. He was interested in who was working for David Eisenhower. And it was kind of a job interview, and I didn't know it. So I asked him what he would be doing if he were my age. He said, well, if I were your age, I'd go to Brazil. That's where things are happening. And then I thought, I'd have to learn Portuguese. And he said, yes. I'm not going to Brazil. I can't do languages. Yeah. But you're right about ambition. I got to play for you something Senator Ted Cruz said to me last week about his, he has this new book on woke. And this new book has in it a reference to Hillsdale, where Senator Cruz spoke early in his tenure as a senator. He said it's one of the last places in America you might actually find a free and full exchange of ideas. And we don't have the clip is frozen, so I can't play it for you. But he went on to say that most college campuses have become immune to ideas and free speech. They don't want it. They shut it down. And we're going to talk about that next week. But that is not the case at Hillsdale. I'm sure you invite people from all across the political spectrum. I'm not sure who comes, but very few places are still devoted to that.
Well, it's, so first of all, what's wrong in colleges? Because in your notes that we ignore, you write that they're breaking down. They are. Why are they breaking down? Well, I think that they are fundamentally misaligned. It is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition, that people not be constrained in what they say in a college. But you have to step back and see why it's not sufficient. First of all, every organization, every community, writes Aristotle in the first line of the Politics, aims for some good. What good do they aim for? And the answer is learning together. The word college means partnership. So we're here to do something together. Now, what is the something? To be done together, there has to be an agreement about what it is. We just talked about the core curriculum at Hillsdale College. There are people who don't want to study math. There are people who don't want to study English. Good. Go somewhere else. Here we do that. Now, once you've put that in the curriculum, you are affecting not only their speech, also their thoughts. You are commanding, and they, with you, are commanding their mental weather. What are they doing? And that means that you're supposed to learn, and the purpose then is not to make points in political demonstration. And so we have a speech code here. We've been criticized for it lately. But it says that you can say what you want if you can say it in a civil and academic manner, aiming to produce knowledge. And that means we don't, we're a very conservative college. And, we never adopted that, by the way. We just kept doing what we've always done since 1844. And that marks us out as conservative. And it does have an effect on people if you read a bunch of old books and find value in them, because you've undercut the foundation of progressivism when you do that.
Yes, you've destroyed it.
All the latest stuff is the most important stuff.
I don't know if you saw that this week, Iowa.
That's what we do. And that means that, we have an honor code, and I give an honor code talk, and I generally say at the honor, and the freshmen all show up and then they have to sign the honor code, which they've had from the beginning of their knowledge of Hillsdale. If you come to Hillsdale, this is the basis of the contract. And they know that from the first minute. But just before they sign it, on the second day they're on campus, we talk for an hour, sometimes more, in the auditorium with all the freshman class. And I would usually say, how are we going to get along with each other? The first thing to know is there's somebody in this room who's going to come to your wedding and your funeral. And probably more than one somebody. And you should treat everyone here as if they are potentially that. That means that we have Jews here. We don't chant, kill the Jews. You see, that breaks that up, right? And then, because see, it's just so, I told you about the ridiculous Simpson boys, led by an idiot named Flanagan, who's actually a senior and a very smart boy. And they're doing all that together. And, they got off the point. They were organizing an expedition to India and me to pay for it and give them academic credit. And it wasn't hard to get them back on the point, but just think how intense and close it is. Now, here's how we conceive college today. We think of it as credentialing. It is that. So Harvard, which has disgraced itself over the Gaza stuff.
Yes, it has.
That's the credential, right? You have that credential. Wonder you didn't make more of your life. And then they think of it as preparing them for the kind of society they want to foster, which is the progressive society. And also it's an afterthought. Is there any particular thing you need to know to have a Harvard degree? What do they say?
Not a thing. Dr. Arnn, I have told my children I am opposed to any of my grandchildren going near the place unless it is completely changed in the decade that separates them from that potential. We'll come back after the break and talk about that. We're mixing up our outlines, but that doesn't matter because this is actually the essence of every Hillsdale dialogue. Stay tuned, America. Except at hillsdale.edu, you'll find it all, or at hughforhillsdale.com.
Do you believe in our founders' vision for America? That our republic will only survive if we are an educated and informed people who know our rights and duties. Since 1844, Hillsdale College has sought to educate all who wish to learn about these timeless principles of self-government. For more than 50 years, the college has worked to spread that mission by sending Imprimis to millions of Americans. Imprimis features some of the best speeches given at Hillsdale events, and now an audio version of the popular Speech Digest is available in a new podcast of the same name. And, like the print publication, Imprimis, the podcast, is always free. Listen to the best arguments from speakers such as Chris Rufo, Molly Hemingway, Mark Stein, and Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn, read by Hillsdale students. Subscribe today to listen to Imprimis at podcast.hillsdale.edu. podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio.
Welcome back, America. This is almost an introduction to next week because we're going to dive deep into this because we have to. There's a crisis on American campuses, and I don't know what American parents are going to do, Dr. Arnn, or how they are going to discern whether or not the college that they are about to send their daughter to, they can't all go to Hillsdale. I'm sure your applications are through the roof because Jewish students will not be confronted with threats to their person, and Palestinian students will be treated with respect. I just know that. I've been there enough. But what do you tell the parent that can't get their kid to go to Hillsdale? What do they look for?
Well, it's hard. It's politics is a very serious thing, and you learn if you study politics in general, which I happen to have done, and you've done some. You learn that it has a natural monopoly on force, and when it goes bad, it affects everything. And, what's the other thing about, there is perfect school choice for college education, but with a difference. There are hundreds of pages of rules that go along with all of that. And the provision of the money, it carries those rules, and it also changes the relationship colleges have with their students. Because if you're, most people think, well, fancy people like you and me, we think of college as being like Harvard and Yale, right? And that's a very rarefied atmosphere, and the operating conditions are entirely different there than they are in most colleges. Hillsdale College is somewhere in between. The typical liberal arts college, which is a dying breed in America right now, it gets 40 to 75% of its money from the government. It's in a constant struggle to get 40 or 50 more students so they can balance the books. And 80 or 90% of their revenues come from tuition. And, that is not exactly the right relationship because, you need them to join a community willingly and with the ability to do the work, right? So one of the first steps in education is you have to teach people to forget about themselves. Because, you can read On the Soul, Perisuke, by Aristotle, which is how the human soul works. It's an amazing book. And in book 3, chapter 4, if I remember correctly, he describes how a human being is able to use a common noun. How are we able to see the form of a thing that identifies what kind of thing it is? Because that's, by the way, always something different from the thing. I have two things here I can illustrate for anybody who's watching us. That's a bottle and that's a bottle. One of them's medicine, one of them's chewing gum. How do we know they're both bottles? And the answer is, he says, the form of the bottle is something different from the matter of the bottle. They're both made of plastic, but a lump of plastic is not a bottle. You could melt it and it wouldn't be a bottle anymore. Something, an activity, a form, is holding it together. But we have a soul that can participate in that activity. And the requirement of that soul is that it has no matter in it at all. Else it couldn't be the bottle, and then the next thing, everything else. The mind is nothing except what it thinks. And that means that the specific beauty of the human soul is that it can be objective. It can be one with the object. And education is learning to do that. And that means, of course, you have to question yourself all the time. And you have to grow your powers to focus on the thing that you're talking about or trying to understand. And that means if you show up with a recognized identity, I represent this thing, And then everybody's in a contest. Whose thing is to dominate? Whose thing is to get attention? Is it the Palestinians or the Israelis, right? Well, the truth is, the first step in that conflict is to understand some things. There are two kinds of things you have to understand that conflict. You have to understand what a human being is. And if you do understand that, you will understand that they all have their rights, and they ought not to be killing each other. That will raise in your mind the question in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or the Israeli-Hamas conflict, more sharp and terrible. Who actually respects people's rights the best? That'll be a question that'll come up in your mind, right?
That is the question.
What is the story that places those people there?
And we will come back to that next week, because we're going to spend 2 weeks on this, because it's really a question that is dividing and destroying campuses everywhere, but not Hillsdale. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All of our dialogues collected at Hugh4Hillsdale.com. But if you want to hear Dr. Arnn's conversation referenced with novelists and great thinkers, those are all at Hillsdale.edu. Hugh4Hillsdale.com is just these dialogues. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.